If you think AI can't do real client work, you're already falling behind. This is a TV-ready commercial I made using only AI tools. And it holds up for one reason. It's built like a real ad and not a tech demo. I'm not here to sell you gimmicks. I'm here to show you how AI fits into commercial animation in a way that clients trust, approve, and pay for. I'm Jack. I've been a visual effects artist in the advertising industry for over a decade now, and I've worked for many of the biggest brands on the planet. And by the end of this video, you'll have the exact workflow to transform a simple idea into a polished ad-ready spot. No creative studio, no expensive agency, just you and your laptop. And guys, if you do enjoy today's content, make sure to whack a like on there for me, consider subscribing, and of course, ring that bell notification icon. So to create our ad, we're over on Artlist, and a big thank you to them for inviting me out to New York to check out their new user experience named AI Toolkit. It was great meeting so many other creators as well as the Artlist team themselves, and being able to pick their brains about how this experience has been designed specifically with filmmakers and advertisers in mind. And of course, that is exactly what we're focusing on with this project. So where did we start? Of course, it all begins with coming up with that initial idea. And for this project, I wanted to task myself with creating an ad for a bank. And this bank is specifically aimed at families. So parents who are maybe struggling to balance the expenses of home ownership as well as providing for their kids. So of course, it was very important to have a parent as the main character of our film. And what I also decided quite early on is that I wanted to make this ad animated. And that's just because sometimes I think banks, particularly bank adverts, can come across as a bit kind of cold and sterile. So it's really important to try to mitigate that. So as you can see here, I've written quite early on a charming, cozy feeling ad with a hand animated feel and imperfect knitted visual style, following a dad octopus as he struggles to balance the financial side of being a homeowner and having children. And after that, I decided to tackle the voiceover. And this is a different workflow to what I normally do. I think I've learned a lot from tackling more of these projects recently, and I've learned how foundational both the voiceover or narration and the music is to any edit. A lot of the time it's them that kind of lead the edit itself. You kind of build all of the visual elements around the audio. And so I thought this time around, rather than reverse engineering everything, starting with the visual and going back to the audio, let's just start with the voiceover. It kind of makes sense. So what we have here is the finished voiceover script. I wanted to fit in a lot of kind of coral reef and marine life puns, but nothing that's kind of too cheesy or on the nose. But once I had this down, I was able to head back over to Artlist. And let me just throw on my headphones for this next section of the video, because if we head on up to the top of this banner here, you can see we have a tab for video and image and another tab for voiceover. So we'll click into here. And on this home page, we've got all sorts of examples. If we go ahead and click on some of them.
The next exercise is going to focus on our anger control.
Got this one here.
Here's a second, when everything you've carried finally lets go.
Something a little bit different.
More than exploration, it was obsession to know what's beyond the silence.
Kind of that classic trailer style voice there, but a really great variety of different options when you're picking your voiceover artist. And if we head on up to the top left-hand corner and hover over this section, you'll see that this area will expand. And that's because when you start generating with the AI toolkit, the generations are placed within a session. And if we click into this session here, it's just a really nice way of organizing all of your generations for you. This is even more useful when it comes to generating our images and videos. So it really is just as simple as pasting in your script. You can see that we're also able to resize the text prompt field as well. That's a nice little feature. And then if we click onto this switch voice tab, we have access to this huge library of voices. We can activate different filters as well, narrowing things down in terms of the category, the gender, and the age. And I knew that I wanted a man to voice our ad. And I knew that I wanted him to be middle-aged to give the voice a little bit more kind of authority, but also to feel quite warm and cozy as well. So the first voice that I tried out was the mentor, who sounded like this.
Some mornings are less of a to-do list and more of a tide.
And whilst I did like this voiceover artist, I just felt that he wasn't kind of giving the vibe that I was after. It wasn't kind of warm and cozy enough, you know? And you can see that a few of these early generations, I've labeled different stability percentages. So when we're generating our voices, that is one of the parameters we're able to control. You can see here, if we hover over this little icon, it says control how expressive or stable the voice sounds. Lower stability makes the voice more expressive and less consistent across generations. But I generally found that 50% stability seems to work pretty well. And here we're also able to select all of the different voice models. So various different routes we can go down there as well, all of which have slightly different parameters. And eventually I ended up running the script through the voiceover artist named Shadow, and this is what we got back.
Some mornings are less of a to-do list and more of a tide.
And straight away I knew this was exactly what I was after. His voice kind of has that like huskiness that feels nice and natural, but he also sounds very like friendly and approachable, and that's exactly the vibe that we're going for with this animated ad. So what I did was I went ahead and clicked on this icon here to get the voiceover downloaded. And moving over to Premiere Pro, I went ahead and cut out all of those brief pauses, because if we listen to the voiceover through, there are quite a lot of gaps, like the pace is a little bit slow.
Grip, something else drifts in, and suddenly you're tied up, clinging to bills, dragged down by subscriptions, and trying not to drop what matters.
See, some of those breathing spaces are just a little bit too long. So we are kind of treating this like a real recorded voiceover. I'm going in and I'm cutting out those kind of awkward silences. And if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see that I've faded in each of those clips of the voiceover. And if we just take a listen, I'll show you the difference in the kind of pacing. This is what I settled on. This was actually the first part of the edit that was kind of locked down.
Some mornings are less of a to-do list and more of a tide. Just as you get a grip, something else drifts in, and suddenly you're tied up.
So I was really happy with this. I felt like it was a really solid anchor for the rest of what was to come. And the next part of the audio editing process was, of course, to add the music track. So if I just unmute this bottom track here, I wanted to go for something that was quite kind of minimal but charming as well. And it times out really nicely with the voiceover. So let's go ahead and listen to both of these together. This is where the edit really begins.
Some mornings are less of a to-do list and more of a tide. Just as you get a grip, something else drifts in.
So I was really happy with this as the base of our edit. The next thing I did was I wrote out the script itself. So basically it was just a case of taking specific lines of the voiceover and then thinking about each individual shot that I wanted to accompany that specific line. So of course we start in the kitchen with the octopus dad kind of cooking pancakes. Then we want to show the children jumping up and down on the sofa. I knew that I wanted to also show him in different environments as well. So in the supermarket, for example. And I also had this nice idea whilst I was writing the script of a kind of metaphor. And that's this idea that the dad octopus is getting so kind of overwhelmed with his finances that his tentacles end up getting kind of knotted. And that's of course why the ad is called Coral Banking Tied Up. So at that point, all of the pieces are set and I was able to return back to Artlist once again, this time heading back up to the top banner, the AI toolkit, but now clicking into video and image. And if I just resize the text prompt window here, you can see that we're on the explore page. This is great if you're looking for some kind of inspiration. There's a lot of really nice varied examples of AI filmmaking and advertising here for you guys to check out. Just hover on each one, they're going to automatically start playing. And that's the same for your generations as well, which nicely brings me on to over here. You can see all of my different sessions. And I knew that from my script, I wanted to show some of the Coral Bank's user interface in the phone screen and the laptop screen. So again, it actually made sense to start there rather than generating the starting images for each shot that we go on to animate later on. I wanted to start with creating the UI elements. So here we are. So what we're able to do, of course, is go ahead and upload an image. I actually created a very basic version of this kind of text, kind of similar font but I fed it into Artlist. I picked the Nano Banana Pro model, which is the same image model that I used throughout this entire project. I still think it's the best one out there. We're able to go ahead and pick our aspect ratio. Resolution, I always go ahead and set to 4K. We also can pick the amount of images that we wanted back. And what I did was I took that original very simple reference that I fed in, and I just asked Nano Banana to change the letter A to look slightly more like a fish. Keep it subtle, ensure the text has sharp lines. Make the banking a green color that complements the orange of the word coral. Add a subtle gradient to all lettering, professional branding for a big budget client. And what we got back was really, really nice, exactly what I was after. But really, this was just the first step, because later on, we go ahead and run it through this. We take that very graphical looking logo and turn it into this knitted style. And I have to give a shout out to Mayor King AI. He posted some really nice text prompts the other day, and I was very much inspired to replicate this knitted style. Really went on to inform the aesthetic of the entire advert. It's a very cool workflow to be able to take these graphics and run them through a completely different style to really bring them to life and give them more character. And then I went ahead and ran that through the upscale prompt. This is something that PJ Ace has been doing recently as well. You can see it's a very collaborative effort. You can learn a lot from other creators in the AI space. Hopefully you guys can see that by running it through this prompt here, which is kind of trying to upscale, increase the sharpness, increase the fidelity of the textural elements, we end up getting a really nice result here from Nano Banana Pro. And really we're starting to build up the aesthetic of the entire ad, even though we haven't even created any of our characters yet. I actually didn't end up using the web-based layout in the ad at all. It was just a little bit too complicated to translate into the rest of the kind of quite simplistic feeling knitted style. But I still think this was a really important creative exercise. And of course, the knitted logo ended up being shown right at the end of the ad. So now we went ahead and moved on to this session here. You can see it's titled Initial Testing. This is where we're really starting to get into some character design. And there was one point where I was debating kind of making it like a old-fashioned style cartoon. Also looked at these kind of clay animation styles as well. But there's something about this knitted vibe that I really, really liked. And this is one of the first things that I went ahead and generated. You can see the text prompt up here. Medium shot of an octopus cooking in a family kitchen with warm lighting. Handcrafted knitted wool textures. Every element appears made of soft yarn with visible knitting stitches and fuzzy fibers. Rounded edges, tactile surfaces, no hard lines. And as we move up within this session, I kept experimenting with slightly different styles. And eventually, if we head on over to the kitchen scene session, we started really nailing that character design down. Let me just scroll down here. So the approach that I went for was actually similar to what I used in my last video. If you guys watched that, that was a short film. And this is a process that you may have seen a lot of AI filmmakers use recently. And that is this idea of creating these 2x2 grids that look like storyboard panels. And the reason this is a nice way to approach making the starting frames of each of your shots, these frames, of course, it will go on to take and animate with video models later on in the video, is that because rather than generating each image completely separately to each other, we're generating multiple images within the same generation. And that means that Nano Banana Pro has a greater understanding of character consistency and continuity. Once again, you can see the prompt up here in the top right hand corner. I will drop these down below in the video description if you wanted to go ahead and copy them, try out this method for yourself. What we essentially do is the prompt starts with this framework, which is informing Nano Banana that we want these 2x2 grids. And then I go on to specifically describe each individual numbered frame with what I want Nano Banana Pro to show me. In terms of the image reference, we would have gone for that initial generation of the octopus in the kitchen. That really bedded the style for all of the generations that came off the back of that. And of course, each of those storyboard panels relates directly to the script that I wrote because I already knew which shots I needed to generate. And that's why planning is so important when it comes to these projects and making the most of your credits, making them go further. And once you're happy with your 2x2 grid, you can move on to the next step of the process. We're applying that same upscale prompt that I used earlier on the Coral Banking logo, except I'm just adding this brief sentence at the start, crop, so that only the top left storyboard panel is shown. So rather than us having to manually go in, download each 2x2 grid, crop them in some other software, and then re-upload them into Artlist, we can actually do it all directly here, just by adding that very simple sentence to the start of our text prompt. So we're cropping into each individual frame, and then we are upscaling them. We're adding sharper textures into them. The 2x2 grid workflow is really, really great, and being able to kind of carry out the crops within Nano Banana Pro without having that extra step makes it even better. You can see here this shot, for example, the level of textural detail on this fridge and the fact that all of the lettering is perfect and still has that knitted feel. I was seriously impressed with this. So we're essentially just moving through each shot on our script and just ticking them off as I went along. I'm also doing image edits here. So for example, I'm taking this shot of the fridge and then I'm asking for the octopus's tentacle to be wrapped around the door frame. And another nice way to use the 2x2 grid as well is I'm asking it just to generate alternate angles of the same scene. Obviously, I knew for this shot I didn't need 4 different shots, but I just went ahead and asked it to generate them anyway. And then I've got extra stuff to work with later down the line. So there's a variety of different ways to use the 2x2 grid method in your image generation. Now jumping into the separate session for the supermarket scene, if I go ahead and open this particular 2x2 grid up, you can see the method worked really well. Again, I was seriously impressed by how Nano Banana Pro was able to populate each shelf with these knitted baby formula tubs. Really great shots here. I wanted to generate an exterior shot of the supermarket as well. Now, I didn't even think I was going to use this, by the way, but it ended up working really nicely in the edit, so I'm glad that I did. Once again, this shot here, the close-up of the baby formula, I just think this looks amazing. Like all of these tiny little fabric fibers coming off of the asset. Really, really impressive stuff, this. Moving over to the separate session for the park scene as well. I can kind of show you guys the issue that I had when I was trying to translate the phone's UI into that kind of knitted style. It just wasn't really working properly. And I do think that a good rule of thumb when it comes to AI, advertising and filmmaking is simpler is often better. Give yourself a bit of an easier time if it isn't going to kind of have any detriment to the narrative, which this doesn't, right? It still works exactly as we need it to. I've realized recently that using AI tools, it's a lot of problem solving. You're gonna run into issues when you're using them, and it's about how you navigate those issues. Once again, moving over to the dining room scene session, you can see I was struggling to translate the UI onto the laptop screen as well. So once again, ended up just going for a more simplistic approach, and it worked really nicely. Another really nice generation here. Something that I found with using this specific style is that close-ups work really well. If you move your characters or objects further from the camera, they just don't seem to look as nice for whatever reason. But when they're up close here and you can see all of those fabric fibers and the real detail and texture and this kind of shallow depth of field as well, it just looks great. So once we worked our way through ticking off each individual shot, getting the generations that I knew would serve the narrative properly, it was time to move on to generating our videos, taking these as our starting frames, running them through an AI video generator to bring them to life. So we'll move into our video generation session here. Again, very useful to just have all of our AI videos kept in the same place. And just to show you guys briefly how you can go ahead and generate your videos, you can see we have this tab here. We're able to flip over to generate videos. We can go ahead and upload a reference image to act as our starting frame. Clicking this tab here, you can select from a variety of different AI video models. These are some of the best on the market right now. And I ended up going for VO 3.1 for this particular project because I know that it handles animation really well. We can select our aspect ratio. Of course, for an ad, we want 16:9, 9:16 for social content. Select the length of the duration. We can select if we want audio or not. We can define the resolution. And a nice feature as well is we can also go ahead and add a negative prompt. And what I added to this negative prompt field for all of my generations was music dialogue, because I knew that I didn't want my octopus characters to randomly start talking. And I also knew that I already had the music and voiceover set, so we didn't need any of those things that VO 3.1 really likes to just instinctively put into its generations. So we can run through these examples and start talking about what works well and what issues I ran into. This here was one of the first generations I put together, and you can see the octopus kind of starts walking. He's almost got like an entire body there. Doesn't really work for what we were after. So what I went ahead and did later was ask for the octopus to stay stood behind the stove. I didn't want him to move away because the video model doesn't know what this character is or how we want him to look. So if we keep him behind the stove, we're kind of limiting the amount that VO 3.1 can fail or misinterpret what it is that we're after. Now, this shot here we spoke about earlier on, where I knew that I wanted the fridge to open up, and I would just reverse the shot in the edit to have the dad closing the fridge. But you can see here that VO 3.1 is adding in this completely separate gloved hand thing. And yeah, not what we're after. And all I did to solve this was just run the same prompt a few more times, and I got this generation here, which mostly worked well. You'll see what I mean by mostly. You see that tentacle kind of moves into the frame and then fuses with the existing one. I kind of worried about that, but then I thought if I just cut in at this point where the tentacle was already fused, we should be good. And it turns out that it worked perfectly for the edit, just reversing that shot so that rather than the freezer door being opened up, it's actually being shut. And I have to talk about this shot here because this generation is probably my favorite in the entire ad. It came out so well. I wasn't sure if VO 3.1 would be able to understand what it was that I was after. This is quite ambitious for an AI video model. So for the text prompt, I said slow dolly camera move in. The octopus's tentacles each stay in the same position, but individually tie themselves into knots as he sighs. Now, originally I wanted the baby formula being knocked off the shelf to just be a single shot. I didn't want to have a cutaway, but I also knew this was pretty ambitious, and you can see some of the kind of pitfalls of running that idea through a video model. So there are obviously various different issues with this, mainly that when the baby formula tub comes away from the shelf, it's like a massive, like industrial sized thing. It doesn't match what you'd expect or what we see in the following shot. So what I ended up having to do was go back to Nano Banana Pro and create an alternate shot where we just see the shelf and the tentacle kind of accidentally knocking it off there. And this is exactly what I was speaking about earlier. Problem solving. Sometimes you have to go back to the image generation part of your workflow just to work your way around these issues. Now, another generation that I was seriously impressed with was this one here, where the post-it notes are getting crossed off. I really didn't think this was going to work. So what I did was I ran that original shot of the fridge door with the tentacle in it through Nano Banana Pro and asked to add a thick black knitted pen to the tentacle's hand. I then ran that image through VO 3.1 with the prompt, a static camera captures a knitted octopus's tentacle using the knitted black pen it is holding to mark a single large black cross on each colourful post-it note. After finishing, the tentacle elegantly exits the frame while holding the pen. And I would have preferred that the tentacle stays kind of like wrapped around the pen like it does in this first frame here. But I think given kind of like the context and the style of this ad, it doesn't matter too much. And I was just so impressed with the fact that it managed to pull off this generation that I just had to keep this in the finished ad. And I was actually really worried because once again, it might not seem like a particularly ambitious thing to try to get an AI tool to pull off. But I'm kind of working on this thinking, I don't know if this is really going to be able to be generated. And then am I going to have to go back to the drawing board and try and like re-script this shot somehow? But here you go. It worked. And that was a hell of a relief. I think general rule of thumb when it comes to animating your AI images with a video model is to just go for quite clear but simple prompts, and also understand that you will run into issues as you go along. It's kind of how you deal with those issues. And I think the more you use these tools, the better you're going to get at dealing with the things that you're inevitably going to run into. So again, we fall back on our planning here, the script itself. I would just run through, and every time that I got part of the script finished, I would just highlight it green so that I knew that part of the film was done. And over the course of time, I managed to bank up a load of really great AI video generations. And then it was time to move back into the edit. Like I say, guys, I was really impressed with Artlist's new AI toolkit. Really nice, simple, clean interface with a great level of control for your generation. So if you do want to go ahead and check it out, you can click the link down below in the description. So like I said earlier on in the video, the voiceover really kind of leads the narrative of the entire ad. So when I was going ahead and dropping in each of our video generations, I'm just cross-referencing the script, so I know which shots go with which voiceover line. So it was actually pretty easy to piece this together. If I just run through, I'm just going to mute all of the audio tracks as we kind of go through each shot, and I'll raise any kind of problems or anything that I found interesting as I went along. The opening shot here actually took quite a few generations to get right, even though it's pretty simple. Originally, I was trying to get the dad octopus to like use his different tentacles to chop up food, pack lunch boxes, all of this stuff. But again, I just had to make it a little bit more simple so that he's just making pancakes, kind of flipping them over in the pan. This shot was pretty easy, just kind of rerun. And then we move on to the freezer door being shut. Like I say, this was reversed shot where I cut into it so we didn't see that fused weird extra tentacle coming over. So I knew that reversing the shot would just make this whole video generation easier for that particular one. Here, of course, we have my favorite generation of the entire film. Didn't have to do anything there. It just worked really quite well. Now, if I cut into what I originally had for the edit, we dwelled on this shot of the supermarket for a really long time. It actually feels kind of like weird and awkward. And usually when it comes to an ad, there are quite a few different shots and cutaways there. So if I re-enable this layer here, you can see, like I said earlier on, I ended up using the exterior shot of the supermarket to act as kind of establishing the scene. And then we cut into the dad octopus walking down the aisle. And again, we have our extra shot here where the tub is being knocked off the shelf. Like I said earlier, I was originally trying to pull that off in this same shot, but I just couldn't get it to work. So we have our cutaway where it drops off the shelf, and then we have the dad octopus looking at it, and then we see that it's baby formula as well. And that's important that we see what he's dropped very clearly, because the voiceover line is in trying not to drop what matters. We then cut over to the park scene, and actually this was all pretty simple, I've got to say. These generations were not too difficult to get. Similar deal when our dad octopus is sat at the dining room table, finally kind of easing his financial worries by logging into Coral Banking. This here was an additional shot. I felt I was just dwelling on this one here for too long. You will find that a lot when you're going through your edits, that you're just hanging on a shot for ages. Whenever you feel like that, whenever you're watching your edit and that kind of pops into your head, that is when you need to go take a step back and generate something else to plug that hole. Like, unless you're trying to deliberately make something feel awkward or lengthy or drawn out, which often isn't the case when it comes to an advert, you need to kind of create another shot to fill that gap, basically. Really love this generation here where the knitted laptop is like really subtly moving up and down. And once again, with the shot of the crossing off the post-it notes, that shot kind of dwelled a bit too long again. I think I didn't even have an additional shot. So if I just throw that away, we just went through like this, and it just felt like we were just watching it for too long, basically. So once again, I ended up generating another cutaway to show how happy the dad is just in himself, because later on we're going to see how happy he is with the kids. I want to show that he's happy in himself because he's kind of conquered these financial worries with Coral Banking helping him. It's that moment of being satisfied where he's ticked off all of these issues and he's just kind of like, yeah, okay, we're on track now, you know. His tentacles are knotted, and now he's able to go and just have a fun time with his kids. Again, we have this really nice generation where the fish kind of comes out of the A, the logo, and swims across the screen. If I just drag this out here, I think that I ended up speeding this up. Yeah, I ended up speeding this up loads. 250% this. So let me put this back to its normal speed and show you guys what it was like. So very kind of like drawn out and labored. If we think about what this is like essential branding for Coral Banking, right? So we don't really want that logo covered up by this knitted fish for ages. And also, again, it just feels a little bit like awkward. So what we ended up doing was speeding up that first half and then by the time the fish has exited the left of the frame, it just turns into a frame hold. This is just a still frame at this point. And without the VO, again, it kind of feels a little bit awkward. But once we have the VO in there, it all just kind of feels really nice. So I added just a couple of extra bits of audio. We'll run through this. So first, we have that rope tightening sound effect to really sell that idea that his tentacles are getting knotted and make it seem like a little bit painful and uncomfortable. Then with the exterior shot of the supermarket, we have that kind of underwater classic sound. And then when we get to the park, we have like birds singing. So it's pretty simple, really. This really nicely fades out because we also have that kind of notification sound as well for the phone. What I'll do as well is I'll just go ahead and unmute these tracks so we can just listen to the edit without the VO or the music. So of course, all of the audio that you're hearing now was generated natively within VO 3.1. We added that so you can kind of work on top of the audio that you're getting from video models to kind of amplify certain things when you think it's needed. Kind of selling the atmosphere there with those kind of birds singing. Nice sound effect of sipping, again, natively generated within VO 3.1. And again, we've reused that same kind of rope tightening sound effect to show that he's kind of being eased at this point. That's really nice as well. Once again, natively generated, the kind of pen scratching out the post-its, and then the sound of the video games playing. Really nice. So there you have it, guys. We have now explored the entire process for how I created this animated ad. If you do have any questions at all, be sure to drop them down below in the comment section. I'll reply to as many as I possibly can. If you have enjoyed today's content, make sure to whack a like on there for me. If you're new, consider subscribing and of course, ring that bell notification icon so you never miss any future content. I think now it's time to check out the finished animated ad. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.
Some mornings are less of a to-do list and more of a tide. Just as you get a grip, something else drifts in, and suddenly you're tied up, clinging to bills, dragged down by subscriptions, and trying not to drop what matters. So here's a better way to turn the tide. With Coral Banking, you can set money aside for the little ones, track bills and subscriptions as they drift in, and see where it's all going. Clear as open water. Less scrambling, fewer surprises, more of you where you're needed. Coral Banking, for the grown-up stuff and the growing up stuff.